رحم الله من قرأ سورة الفاتحة. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي لا يبلغ مدحته القائلون ولا يحصي نعماه العادون ولا يؤدي حقه المجتهدون، الذي بعد فلا يرى وقرب فشهد النجوى تبارك وتعالى، والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء وخاتم المرسلين وشفيع المذنبين سيدنا ونبينا بالقاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. واللعنة الدائمة الباقية لأعدائهم ومنكر فضائلهم وغاصب حقوقهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم: إن الدين عند الله الإسلام. صلوات. It reminds me of the early days when I came to Vancouver. But the day after Ashura, it was a similar situation. And therefore, in the second Muharram that I did here, after the Majalis of Ashura, we made a special announcement that there is a message of Imam Hussain that I would like to convey tomorrow, so that, people should show up. Alhamdulillah, that had an effect. And I had forgotten that. Maybe I should have announced and repeated that last evening. Salawat. I would like to begin by thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the opportunity for doing the Azan of Sayyid al-Shuhada once again. This year, in the year 1433 of the Hijrah. And would like to also, thank the audience for showing up during these 10 nights, which was an encouragement for me. And inshallah, we hope that, I was able to convey the message that I was trying to deliver on the theme of continuity and change in Islam. It's an attempt of answering the question that how can Islam, which came 1400 years ago in the Arabian Peninsula, be still a relevant religion for us in the 21st century in the western part of the world. There is a difference of Zaman and Makan between that time and this time. And we saw that the answer actually lies in this understanding of the process of continuity and change in Islam. We started with a discussion about the three areas where we have to deal with this theme separately. When it comes to the first area of i'tiqadat, the system of beliefs, there can be no change. Allah was one, day one. He is now, even now, one, and He will still be one. Yes, the understanding or the arguments or the proof will increase. We will come up, for example, as human beings, develop their own science and technology. They will be able to appreciate the signs of Allah's power and glory in this earth as well as in this space, and even within themselves. And that will become a new way of appreciating the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But it doesn't change our belief in Allah. He is still one, He is still all-powerful, and He is still the one who manages the system of the universe. Then we looked at the second area of our discussion, and that was our ibadat, the system of rituals. And that's where we saw that there is a combination of continuity and change. When it comes to ibadat, there is more continuity, but there are also elements of change, especially when we talk about things which depend on zaman and makan. And then we came to the last part of our discussion, which was the major part of the talks that we had, and that's to do with mu'amalat, about our lifestyle, the way of life. And since Islam is a world religion, it could not be tied to one culture, one language, or one lifestyle. Yes, Islam has some, general guidelines. There are some values that Islam considers to be constant. Will never change or can never be suspended. But there will be different ways of following that. And that's where we saw, in our discussion, we started with the process of Hujjatul migration from the Islamic point of view. Then we looked at hijab as an example of modesty and decency as a constant value which will never change. It will never ever become obsolete. But then there was variable forms of how that law of hijab in Quran is implemented in different cultures in different ways. As long as they fulfill the requirement of Islam, all these varieties of doing ways of hijab would still be considered, equally Islamic. Then we looked at the issue of, our life here. That when we talk about coming up with a new cultural context for Muslims in the West, we need to study this society. Look at the good and bad of it, so that we can stay away from the evil part of it, and we can maximize the benefit of the positive and good part of it. Especially when we talk about modernity, we looked at the issues of rebellion against tradition, the issue of generation gap. We also looked at the issue of sexual revolution and its impact in morality of this part of the world. And we also looked at the overemphasis given on development of the body at the expense of the soul. We are not against physical fitness, but we believe that there has to be, a balance there. And on that point, let me just, narrate one hadith from Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali bin Abi Talib alayhi salatu wasalam. He says, I'm surprised at a human being that if he is told to sit down in a dark room and then somebody brings a plate that he cannot see what is inside it, that person would be hesitant to eat because he doesn't know what is going into his belly is going to be beneficial or harmful for him. But then Ali says that the same person doesn't really think twice about what is going into his mind and his aql. And so the way we give importance to physical health and fitness, we have to give even more importance to the health of our soul, our heart, and our mind. Salawat. Two important positive elements of the Western society, I discussed about it. One was the issue of knowledge, the importance of knowledge, which is a constant value in Islam, and the changing ways of seeking knowledge. And that's where continuity and change comes in. We also briefly didn't get time that night to talk about the issue of participation in the political process of the society. That now that we are here, we have to do whatever we can. And we'll inshallah talk briefly about it, even in the theme that I have for tonight. In Ashur, we focused on one more example of continuity and change, and that was the tradition of Azadari. Where to summarize that, I would say that essentially, Azadari is a religious tradition. It is part of human nature and based on the sunnah of the Prophet and the Imams of Ahlul Bayt. And their sunnah was qawli and fi'li and amali. they even talked about it, they acted upon it, and they encouraged others to do that. However, as Shia faith moved from one area to another, the community was influenced by the environment, the cultural ways of doing things, and so many things in the traditions of Azadari has gradually evolved in one culture to another. And that's where you see the change come in. So you have the constant system of Azadari which will be there. As long as there are Shias in this dunya, as long as Muharram is there, the Shias will always have Azadari. And even in worse situations, you will see they have that sense. But the format, how it's done, changes. And that is where we have to keep our minds open. That now we are in a new environment. We will definitely maintain the institution of Azadari. It's a lifeline for the Shia community. It's a way of mass education for ourselves. But there will be traditions and ways of doing things which change. Because we have come to a new environment. It's a new cultural context. And we just have to make sure that if the change happens, it happens on the basis of wisdom and knowledge. Where we will have to see what is more beneficial. Sometimes things would be done in Tehran, which would work over there, for example, but not work here in Vancouver. There are things done, in Karachi or Lebanon, which is okay there, have its own impact, might not have the same impact here. I'll just give you an example of Julus. The procession taken out on the day of Ashura or, during the first ashra. The whole purpose is basically to, proclaim the message of Imam Hussain salam to the rest of the society. We do our Azadar in our Hussainiyas, our Imam Bargas, in our centers. We do it in our own ways, in our own languages. This is for us. But when we go out on the streets, the whole purpose there is to let the others know about Imam Hussain and his mission and his purpose. And when you have the others as the audience, you have to make sure your language would be according to the local language. The banners have to be in the language of that area. Even the talks and even the slogans, everything has to be then in which you cannot do it in Arabic or Farsi or Urdu. Because then you are defeating the purpose of Julus. Julus is there to proclaim the message of Imam Hussain for the rest of the humanity. Salawat. A young man came and asked me what about if we gradually think about even changing the style of the alam. As long as you have the alam, it doesn't matter what style you are using. If you want to make it more similar to a flag, there is no problem there. You are doing the Azadari of Sayyid al-Shuhada alayhi salatu wassalam. Salawat. Tonight I would like to talk about another example of continuity and change. And this has to do with the issue of one of the most important social principles in Islam, which is known as Al-Amr bil-Ma'ruf and Al-Nahy anil Munkar. Al-Amr bil-Ma'ruf, commanding the right. Al-Nahy anil Munkar, forbidding the wrong. Now these two principles in our Furu-Din are basically the most important social principles of our faith. I can emphasize this by saying that no Muslim community or Muslim nation can maintain its Islamic identity without implementing Al-Amr bil-Ma'ruf and Al-Nahy anil Munkar. Because if that is not there, then you will not be able to maintain the identity of the community or the society as an Islamic or a Muslim community. This is so important that if you look at Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when he talks about good deeds, you will see there is a set, list. Starts with namaz and then charity and then other things. Namaz is the first one there. But there is a very interesting ayat in Surah Tawbah, ayat number 71. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about a community, you will see that the sequence of the good deeds have changed. When He says, وَالْمُؤْمِنُونَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتُ بَعْضُهُمْ أَوْلِيَاءُ بَعْضٍ. So now He's setting the tone there. That the believing men and the believing women. So the believers in the community, بَعْضُهُمْ أَوْلِيَاءُ بَعْضٍ. They are a wali of one another. They are friends of one another. They are tied by that relationship of religion and deen and mazhab. They are all part of that same wilayat, for example. What do they do? What is the demand of that wilayat? That friendship, that tie that mu'mineen have with one another. As members of the community. The very first thing, يَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْحَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ. And then Allah says, وَيُقِيمُونَ الصَّلَاةِ وَيُؤْتُونَ الزَّكَاةِ. When He's talking about the community and members of the community of Iman, doesn't start with salat and zakat. Doesn't talk about prayers and charity. He says, what do? يَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. They command the good, encourage one another to do good. وَيَنْحَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ. And they forbid one another, discourage one another from doing bad. وَيُقِيمُونَ الصَّلَاةِ. And establish prayer. وَيُؤْتُونَ الزَّكَاةِ. And give in charity. And then instead of prolonging the list, Allah summarizes by saying, وَيُطِعُونَ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولُهُ. In short, they obey Allah and His Messenger. أُولَٰئِكَ سَيَرْحَمُهُمُ اللَّهُ إِنَّ اللَّهَ عَزِيزٌ حَكِيمٌ. These are the people on whom Allah will shower His mercy, and Allah is indeed powerful and wise. Salawat. So when we talk about as a community, Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy al Munkar is first in the importance that we see. And interestingly, since this is the Adhan Sayyid al-Shuhada, Imam Hussain alayhi salam, salawatullah alayhi, gives a commentary on this ayah. And he says, فَبَدَأَ اللَّهُ بِالْعَمْرِ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَالنَّهْيِ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ فَرِيضَةً مِنْهُ لِعِلْمِهِ بِأَنَّهَا إِذَا أُدِّيَتْ وَأُقِيمَتْ استقامت الفرائض كلها هينها وصعبها. It says Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this ayat begins by talking about Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy al Munkar as a duty imposed from Him on the Muslims, because He knows بأنها إذا أديت وأقيمت. Because Allah knows if this order of Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy al Munkar is fulfilled, and if this is established, then all other things will be in their own rightful place. And then Imam says, whether it is, simple matter or serious matter, everything will be done automatically. وَذَلِكَ أَنَّ الْأَمْرِ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَالنَّهْيِ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ دُعَاءٌ إلى الإسلام مع رد المظالم ومخالفة الظالم وقسمة الفعي والغنائم وأخذ الصدقات من مواضعها ووضعها في حقها. He says, because Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy al Munkar is basically calling people to follow Islam. To stay away from being unjust to others, to oppose the Zalimeen, and to distribute the wealth in the way Allah wants us to distribute, and to collect the sadaqat and charity and distribute it in the rightful manner. So what the Imam is saying that, all other things, instead of working on salat and zakat and this and that separately, Imam says Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to implement al-amr bil ma'ruf and nahy al munkar. If that is done, everything else will be done automatically. Salawat. In the theme of continuity and change, the value of amr bil ma'ruf and nahy al munkar is constant. This will never become obsolete. As long as we have Muslims on this earth, as long as we have a community, Al-Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy al Munkar will always be relevant to that community. However, when we talk about change, this is where we have to realize the method of Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy al Munkar depends on time and place. So this is always there. But how you do it depends on a given situation that you find yourself. You know, even in fiqh books, unfortunately, you know, we emphasize on namaz and roza and zakat and hajj and this and that. We really don't go into the details of what is Amr bil Ma'ruf, what is Nahy al Munkar. You know, what are the levels of Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy al Munkar? What are the methods of Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy al Munkar? All the 5 rulings apply on that. There are situations where it is wajib. There are situations where it is sunnah. There are situations where it is okay, you know, neutral. There are situations where it is probably discouraged for you to do it, depending on the circumstance. There could even be a situation where it might become haram for you. You know, so we have all, you know, rules and regulations about it, but we really do not discuss it that much. When we talk about the levels of Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy al Munkar, it starts from the heart. The simplest, you know, or the lowest level was the issue of, you know, mentally doing Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy al Munkar, which means what? You don't really talk to anyone about it. It is just that when you see something good, in your mind you say, this is good, and you feel good about it. And you see something evil, even if you don't have the ability to say anything about it, or to do anything about it. You know, Islam says at least mentally abhor that evil which is being done in your presence. So that is the lowest level of Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy al Munkar. Let me give you an example. We recite Ziyarat Warisa every Thursday night. And you will see that we do the la'nat, where we say, فَلَعْنَ اللَّهُ أُمَّةً قَتَلَتْكَ. You know, those who killed you. But then there is a statement there. فَلَعْنَ اللَّهُ عَلَى أُمَّةٍ وَلَعْنَ اللَّهُ أُمَّةً سَمْيَتْ بِذَلِكَ فَرَضِيَتْ بِهِ. What does that mean? May Allah's la'nat and displeasure be on the community who heard about the events of Karbala and were pleased with what happened to Hussein. Even though they come centuries after Karbala. But they are told about it. You know, there are Wahhabis these days who call Yazid Amirul Mu'mineen. In Saudi Arabia, one of the books published by the Ministry of Education as a textbook to be taught in schools, that's the title, Amirul Mu'mineen Yazid bin Muawiyah. And if a person has that view, when they look at the history of Karbala, whether they hear about it or read about it, even 14 centuries after the events of Karbala, if they are pleased with what Yazid has done, they are included in the la'nah with those who killed Hussein. And so this is the level of what we call mental stage of Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy al Munkar. And so that's the basic. And then we come to the verbal level. If you are in a position of, you know, advising somebody to do good, or discouraging or preventing somebody from doing evil, and your word has power, they will listen to you. You're sure about it, then you have to use it. You know, that's the second level. And then there's a third level, of course, that's not for everyone, and that's the physical level of Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy al Munkar. I just want to make sure everybody understands. This is not for everyone. Maybe the Maulana carrying the asa for Jummah, that's okay. You know, those who are in position of authority in society, they can, what we call law enforcement process can be used to prevent evil or force things which should be done in the society. But that's limited to the level, you know, status and capacity of individuals. Salawat. just to appreciate this system of al-amr bil ma'ruf and nahy al-munkar. As I said, this is a constant value. It will never change. It will never become obsolete. It will always be there as long as we have a Muslim community on this face of this earth. But the methods will change. And in a given situation, you have to decide, what do you have to do? It is your duty to assess the situation and then say, okay, is this wajib for me? Or is it recommended for me? Or is this not my place, really, to do what I'm thinking about doing? And this is where we have to realize that, to appreciate this process of amr bil ma'ruf and nahy al-munkar, sometimes probably we need outsiders to come and tell us that you have such a beautiful system in your own religion. And this is what I'm going to do now. There's a professor in Princeton University by the name of Professor Michael Cook, who has written quite a few books on Islam. He's a professor of Islamic studies. And he did a research on this issue of al-amr bil ma'ruf and nahy al-munkar. And his work, scholarly work, was published by Cambridge University. Just think about it. He came up with a book of 800 pages on this subject. And he deals with all Sunni madhahib, and he also has a chapter on the Shia madhab. It's not that in detail on the Shia part. But what is interesting is, how it was intriguing for him to look at this whole process. And the book is known as Commanding Right and Forbidding Evil in Islamic Thought. In the preface, he talks about it. I may share with you some of his words on this issue. He talks about an incident which happened in the subway station in Chicago a few years ago, where a woman was raped in the station while there were some people there in the station. Nobody did anything, because the society has become such that you don't want to get involved for whatever reasons, whether the system is corrupt or you are afraid about it or whatever. And so he talks about it, and then he says, this is very interesting, where he says, we have a clear conception about the Western society, that we have some kind of duty, not just to behave decently ourselves, but to prevent others from doing things to fellow human beings which are outrageously wrong. Yet in everyday life we lack a name for the duty, still less a general formulation of the situations to which it applies and the circumstances that dispense us from it. The value is there, but it is not one that our culture has developed and systemized. In fact, of course, we understand perfectly well, but our culture provides us with no ready-made articulation of our understanding. Then he talks about our faith. He says, Islam, by contrast, provides both a name and a doctrine for a broad moral duty of this kind, and the name, al-amr bil ma'ruf wal nahy anil munkar. So he's saying our society believes in that, in this concept, but there is not even a name given to that action. And there are no rules and regulations where it becomes wajib, for example, as I said, what you should do, what are the levels. And we have, and this is what he's saying. A few years ago in Toronto, in one of the newspapers there, in the magazines, a Toronto journalist wrote about something very interesting. He says, one day I went to the corner store. Standing in the line by the cashier to pay for the item that I wanted to buy, he says there was a girl standing in front of me, and she had a chocolate bar in her hand. And she put it on the counter to pay for it. But the clerk, the cashier, looked at it, and he said to the girl, you can't eat this. Go and get another one. not this one. So the girl, silently went back and brought another chocolate, and he, processed it. And this fellow was looking at this whole exchange of conversation. Later on, he says to the cashier, "Why did you do this? What is to you? What is she eating?" And he said, "Well, she is a regular customer of mine. I'm a Muslim and she is a Muslim. The chocolate that she had brought in the first place had an ingredient which is forbidden to us. And therefore, I realized it is my duty to tell her that this is not acceptable for us. It's haram." So therefore, she went and brought another one. And he was really amazed by it. He says, "Look at that. He, although not related to this girl, just a cashier in this store, doing his business, but when he realized she is doing something which is forbidden in their religion, he advised her, guided her that don't eat this one, get something else." Then he says, on the same day I went to the bus, and in one of the bus stop, high school kids came out, all of them shouting, talking loud, and, using foul language. And there were many elderly people sitting there. Nobody dared say anything. And these young people also didn't have any respect for others sitting in that bus. And this is where we have to realize that when we talk about Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi al Munkar, this is not something, weird out there. This is actually a social principle where Islam wants us to maintain what is known as ma'ruf, good in society, and prevent what is known as munkar in the society. Salawat. Unfortunately, we as a community are forgetting Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi Munkar. I'll tell you, even in Islamic centers, I hear complaint from volunteers. If they tell any child on the ladies' side or the gents' side, sit down here, don't run around, don't do that, the parents sometimes feel offended. They say, "It's not, you have no right to say anything to my child. It's my business, I'll deal with it." But where is that collective sense of Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi al Munkar? Especially in a public area like Masjid Imam Bara. And so we have to look at this. In the Eastern society, the whole community was, in a way, looking after one another. Many times parents didn't have to worry because the neighborhood was also there watching out for their children. Before even you reach home, your parents will get the report what you are doing outside. And if you come with a complaint that, the teacher today punished me, you will get double at home if you complain about it. That was a very different society where everybody is actually out of concern. This Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi al Munkar is not an issue of poking your nose in the business of others. No. This is showing your concern for the well-being of the members of the society of Iman. Al-mu'minun wal-mu'minat ba'abuhum awliya'u ba'ab. They are wali of one another. They are friends of one another. And the demand of that wilayat that they have is to be concerned for one another. If they see somebody, going on the wrong path, if they have the ability to bring that person back to the right path, it is their duty. That friendship of wilayat and iman demands that they get involved. Salawat. Of course, the method is very important. As I said, it changes from place to place, time to time, situation to situation. We have to learn how to say things and how much pressure you need to put. Sometimes, don't do the overkilling, where you're not just, reforming the fellow, eliminating the whole guy. You look at the Canadian way of doing things. In some places they say no smoking. In the cars when you sit down, if the owner doesn't want you to smoke. Now we have, of course, laws there. But one way of saying is no smoking. or smoking prohibited. Another way is saying, thank you for not smoking. What is the difference between the two? It's the same thing. Both intend the same thing. But one way, you will be able to bring that person to your side with the sense of concern and love, rather than, pushing that person away. Salawat. In the lives of our imams, if you see, many times we have this question, how can Imam Hassan made peace with Muawiyah? And Imam Hussein opposed Yazid. The principle in both places was Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi al Munkar. But the method depends on the circumstance. That's where you see the value is continuing. It was Amr bil Ma'ruf in case of Imam Hassan, it was Amr bil Ma'ruf in the case of Imam Hussein. Situations were different, and different situations ask for different solutions. You look at the life of the Prophet. In Mecca it was a different strategy, in Medina is different. Look at the life of Ali. During the days of Rasulullah, he was always there in the front with his Zulfiqar. But then 24, 25 years, he is silent. And then when Muslims come back to him, again he is there leading, the battle against those who rebelled in Jamal and Siffin and Nahrawan. It's not that in that intermediary period there, Ali had lost his courage and power to fight. No. It was the circumstances which demanded different kind of response. Imam Hassan decided to fight and then conclude the peace treaty with Muawiyah. Imam Hussein alayhi salam, people do not realize that as soon as Muawiyah died, Yazid comes to power and asks Hussein to do bay'at. But Imam Hussein was already Imam for 10 years before that. How come during those 10 days of Muawiyah, he didn't take the stand the way he took the stand against Yazid? Again, it goes back to the circumstance. And so it is the circumstances which dictate how you're going to, implement Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi al Munkar. You look at the life of the fourth Imam, he did the same thing, Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi al Munkar, in a different method. Through his du'as, through his scholarly jihad and his akhlaq. And so when we look at this process, we realize even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in one of the ayat where He talks about the issue of defense, Allah uses a term which is generic. And this is one example of where, the principles will be there for all the time. The methods will change. There is an ayat in Surah Anfal, Surah number 8. Ayat 60, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَعِدُّ لَهُمْ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُم مِّن قُوَّةٍ. Addressing the Muslims, He says, prepare against your enemies or potential enemies. The power, whatever you can master. Quwwah. The word quwwah will never become obsolete. During the days of the Prophet, the word quwwah was applied to horses, swords, spears, bows and arrows. In the 21st century, that same word quwwah is now applied to different means of defense. All the new means that we have. And this is where we see that these rules about the Sharia, especially when we talk about Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi al Munkar, some of these words Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has really selected there just to make us realize that this is a principle and a teaching which can never become obsolete. Salawat. When Allah says, acquire whatever power you can to defend yourself against your enemies, it's not only arms and armaments. What is the most powerful quwwat now? It's the media. We are in this part of the world, we talk about Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi al Munkar. This is not only limited to the Muslim society. When we see munkar out there in the society that we live in, even there we have to do nahi anil munkar. But we can only do it by understanding the quwwat in this society. The political, decisions here are based on the elections. The elections are based on the understanding of the public. And the public's mind is basically formulated by the media. That is where we end up branded as terrorists and fanatics and this and that. And this is one area where we have to realize that yes, our children have to go into the careers where they can make money. And I'm not saying there's any problem going to become doctors and engineers and lawyers and dentists and this and that. But I think as a community, in this part of the world, we also have to encourage our young people to go in the fields where they can, represent our views at that level. They do not necessarily have to say this is Islamic. When the issue of abortion comes up, when the issue of, definition of marriage and homosexuality comes up, when the issue of, for example, poverty, child poverty in Canada comes up, when we talk about homelessness, environmental issues, there can be people who can speak on behalf of Islam without even using the name of Islam. So we have to basically learn the methods which are applicable to this part of the world when we talk about Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy al Munkar. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Imran, ayat number 110, what He says? Kuntum khayru ummatin ukhrijat lil-nas. You are the best community that Allah has selected. To do what? تَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَتَنْحَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ وَتُؤْمِنُونَ بِاللَّهِ. So that you do Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy al Munkar and believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it is a collective principle that we have to implement as a community in this part of the world. Salawat. Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy al Munkar is so precious and important in Islam that if you ask Imam Hussain alayhi salam, what is the religious justification for what you have done? Imam uses the same principle. There was a document that he wrote before he left Medina, and he left with his brother Muhammad Hanafiya. It's a will. It's a wasiyat. It's not a normal wasiyat that we write what is to be done to my body and my, estate after me. This is actually a mission statement about why I'm doing what I'm doing, why I'm opposing Yazid. And there are 4, lines, I would say, each one leading to the other. In the first one, he basically rejects any wrong motivation ascribed to him about his stand against Yazid. He says, "Lam akhruj, inni lam akhruj asharran wala batalan wala mufsidan wala zalima." He says, I have not risen against Yazid because I am an adventure-seeking person. A person who seeks adventure doesn't put his family into danger. I am not doing this out of arrogance. Wala mufsidan wala zaliman. I don't want to create chaos in the society or be unjust to anyone. So first he negates all wrong motivations which will be ascribed to him by the historians of the Darbar of Yazid. And then he says, إِنَّمَا خَرَجْتُ لِطَلَبِ الْإِصْلَاحِ فِي أُمَّةِ جَدِّي. I have risen only to seek reformation of the community of my grandfather. I would like to reform the ummah, the community of my grandfather. But how are you going to do that? How do you justify your reformation? This is where he says, أُرِيدَ أَنْ أَعْمِرَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَأَنْهِيَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ. I would like to implement commanding of the good and forbidding of the evil. And at the end he says, don't think what I'm doing is something new. This is not a bid'ah. وَعَسِيرَ بَسِيرَةِ جَدِّي وَعَبِي عَلِي بِنْ أَبِي طَالِبٍ. He says, by doing this, I'm actually following the path of my father, my grandfather, and my father, Ali bin Abi Talib alayhi salatu wassalam. Salawat. امام حسین علیہ السلام نے اپنے اس وصیت نامے میں آخری جو فقرہ ہے وہ بھی بڑا پاورفل، یعنی اس میں امام نے بتا دیا کہ دیکھو ہمارا راستہ جو ہے حسینیت کا راستہ بالکل ڈائریکٹ، ڈیویشن نہیں ہے، بیچ میں سیدھے جاتا ہے، سیرت جدی و ابی. آپ اہل بیت کے راستے سے علی تک پہنچتے ہیں، علی سے پہنچتے ہیں رسول تک. خلفاء کا کہیں بیچ میں کنیکشن اور ڈائیورژن نہیں ہے. اور اگر آپ اس عنوان کو دیکھیں جو امام نے پیش کیا ہے، وقت میں اتنی گنجائش نہیں ہے، انشاءاللہ کسی اور موقع پر. ہمارا ایک مقالہ ہے اردو میں، ابھی نیو جرسی میں جناب زینب کے سلسلے میں ایک کتاب شائع ہو رہی ہے، اس میں ان لوگوں نے انکلوڈ کیا ہے. بیسیکلی آپ یہ دیکھیں کہ امام حسین علیہ السلام نے جو کچھ کیا ہے، مردوں کو صرف کیوں لے کے نہیں گئے، اہل حرم کو ساتھ کیوں لے کے گئے. انپریسیڈنٹڈ ہے کہ جنگ میں لوگ اپنے بچوں کو لے کے جائیں، اپنے اہل حرم کو لے کے جائیں اس طرح سے. لیکن امام در حقیقت امام کا جو مقصد تھا امر بالمعروف و نہی عن المنکر کا طریقہ بالکل ڈفرینٹ تھا. ڈیپینڈ کرتا ہے سچویشن پہ. امام نے اپنے زمانے میں جو پورے مسلم ورلڈ کا تجزیہ کیا ہے، اینالائز کیا ہے، امام نے دیکھا کہ جہاں تک حجاز کی بات ہے، مکہ مدینہ کی بات ہے، مصر کی بات ہے، عراق کی بات ہے، ایران کی بات ہے، یمن کی بات ہے، یہ تمام وہ علاقے ہیں کہ جہاں مسلمانوں کو حق اور باطل کا علم ضرور ہے. They know where lies the truth. وہ جاہل نہیں. لیکن شام کا جو علاقہ تھا ڈے ون سے بنو امیہ کے کنٹرول میں تھا، فرسٹ خلیفہ کے زمانے سے. شام والے در حقیقت آگاہ نہیں تھے، وہ جاہل تھے. اور امام نے دیکھا کہ جہاں تک یہ دوسرے پروونسز ہیں مسلم ورلڈ کے، ان پر غفلت کا غلبہ آ چکا ہے، انہیں بیدار کرنے کی ضرورت ہے. I have to awaken the conscience of these people who already know what is the truth. اور جہاں تک شام کی بات ہے، وہاں والے جانتے ہی نہیں ہیں، کیونکہ جو انہوں نے اسلام سیکھا ہے وہ وہی اسلام ہے جو آل ابو سفیان نے ڈے ون سے ان کو سکھایا ہے. یہ سب کرسچنز تھے پہلے، سیریا والے، شام والے. اور وہاں اویکننگ کی بات نہیں تھی، وہاں ایجوکیشن کی بات تھی. تو یہ دو پرابلمز تھے عالم اسلام میں. میجورٹی ایریاز میں بیداری کی بات تھی، شام میں آگاہی کی بات تھی. ان کو آگاہ کرنا ہے، ایجوکیٹ کرنا ہے، اور بقیہ علاقوں کو بیدار کرنا ہے کہ تم جس خواب غفلت میں پڑے ہو بیدار ہو. اور امام نے ان دونوں بیماریوں کے لیے دو الگ الگ علاج تجویز کیے. جو حق کو جانتے تھے لیکن خواب غفلت میں پڑے تھے، امام نے کہا کہ ہم اپنی شہادت کے ذریعے انہیں مجبور کریں گے کہ اپنی آنکھ کھولیں. اور جہاں تک شام میں جہالت کا پردہ ہے، یہ ہم تو کچھ نہیں کر سکتے ہیں، لیکن زینب و ام کلثوم اور فاطمہ اور سکینہ جا کے وہاں لوگوں کے آنکھ سے جہالت کے پردے کو. اسی لیے حسین مدینہ سے چلے ہیں، مردوں کو بھی لے کے گئے ہیں، اہل حرم کو بھی لے کے جاتے ہیں، اس لیے کہ دو سچویشن الگ الگ تھی، دونوں کا علاج الگ الگ تھا. اسی لیے آپ دیکھیں کہ جب مکہ سے روانہ ہوئے ہیں اور محمد حنفیہ نے جب کہا ہے کہ بھائی صحیح ہے کہ نانا نے آپ کو خواب میں کہا ہے کہ خدا آپ کو قتیل و شہید دیکھنا چاہتا ہے، تو اہل حرم کو ہمارے حوالے کر دیں، ہم واپس مدینہ لے جائیں گے۔ اس وقت امام محمد حنفیہ کو ڈیٹیل میں سمجھا تو نہیں سکتے، صرف اتنا کہا تھا کہ نانا نے یہ بھی کہا ہے کہ اسلام کے بقا کے خاطر خداوند عالم ہمارے اہل حرم اور بچوں کو بھی اسیر اور قیدی دیکھنا چاہتا ہے، اور اسی عنوان سے اہل حرم کو بھی اپنے ساتھ لے کے آئے تھے۔ عاشور کے دن شہادت کے بعد جو الوداع کا منظر آیا ہے، حسین نے یہی تلقین کی تھی اہل حرم سے۔ شب شام غریباں کس طرح سے گزری ہے، شب 21 کس طرح سے گزری ہے، ہم بیان نہیں کر سکتے، لیکن جس طرح سے جناب زینب نے اہل حرم کو اکٹھا کیا، ان کی حفاظت کی، لیکن کمال زینب کا یہ ہے کہ چوتھے امام کی ایک روایت ملتی ہے کہ وہ رات جسے ہم شب 11 کہتے ہیں، یعنی عاشور کے دن کے ڈھل جانے کے بعد، ان حالات میں اگر کوئی انسان اپنے واجب نماز ہی ادا کریں تو ہم انہیں سلام کریں، لیکن چوتھے امام کہتے ہیں کہ اس رات میں بھی ہمارے پھوپھی نے اپنے نماز شب کو ترک نہیں کیا۔ گھر کے 18 مرد شہید ہوئے، خیمے جلا دیے گئے، سامان لٹ چکا ہے، چادریں لٹ چکی ہیں، بھائی کا لاشا پامال ہوا ہے، اہل حرم جس حالت میں ہیں، لیکن پھر بھی ذکر الہی کا تصور آپ دیکھیں کہ زینب نے اس رات بھی کس کیفیت سے پڑھی ہے ہم نہیں جانتے ہیں، لیکن وہ نماز شب بھی انہوں نے ادا کی ہے۔ 11 کا دن آتا ہے، ظہر کے بعد اعلان ہوا کہ لشکر اب تیار ہو اور کوفے کی طرف روانہ ہونے کے لیے۔ ان ملائین نے اپنے مقتولین کو تو دفن کیا، لیکن حسین نواز رسول کے لاش کو اور شہداء کے لاش کو اسی طرح سے چھوڑ دیا۔ جو شہداء جن کے سر ابھی کٹے نہیں تھے اس دن کاٹے جاتے ہیں، اور آخر میں اعلان ہوتا ہے کہ حسین کے اہل حرم کو بھی اب گرفتار کر کے اونٹوں پر سوار کیا جائے۔ عزاداران حسین یہ جانتے تھے یہ رسول کے کلمہ پڑھنے والے تھے، لیکن جناب زینب نے دیکھا کہ وہ سواریاں لائی جاتی ہیں جس پر سواریاں تو ضرور تھی لیکن اس پر کوئی پردے کا انتظام نہ تھا۔ عمر بن سعد حکم دیتا ہے کچھ سپاہیوں کو کہ جا کے ان عورتوں کی مدد کرو تاکہ انہیں سوار کرو اس سواری پر۔ جناب زینب نے جب دیکھا، ایک مرتبہ عمر بن سعد سے کہا تجھے شرم نہیں آتی ہے؟ تم کن عورتوں کی بات کر رہے ہو؟ یہ آل رسول ہیں، اپنے سپاہیوں سے کہہ دو یہاں سے دور چلے جائیں۔ جناب زینب اور جناب ام کلثوم ایک ایک بیوی کو سہارا دے کے سوار کرتی ہیں، بچوں کو سوار کرتی ہیں۔ آخر میں جب دونوں بہن رہ جاتی ہیں، جناب زینب بڑی ہو کی حیثیت سے حکم دیتی ہیں ام کلثوم سے کہ ہم تمہیں سہارا دیتے ہیں، تم اپنے کو سوار کرو، لیکن آخر میں زینب تنہا رہی۔ عزاداران حسین، دل یہی کہتا ہے کہ یقیناً مدینہ کا وہ منظر یاد کیا ہوگا کہ جب یہ روانہ ہوئے تھی سب نے آ کے مدد کی تھی۔ عجب نہیں کہ فرات کی طرف رخ رکھ کر کے آواز دی ہو کہ عباس آج زینب کربلا میں تنہا ہے، آ کے زینب کی مدد کرو۔ عزاداران حسین، جب جناب زین العابدین اور اہل حرم کو سوار کیا ان لوگوں نے، ان کی شرارت کو دیکھیں، ان کی بربریت کو دیکھیں کہ انہوں نے جان بوجھ کے ان سواریوں کو اس جگہ سے گزارا ہے جہاں شہداء کے لاشیں پڑے ہوئے تھے۔ تمام بیبیوں نے اپنے وارثوں کی لاشوں کو دیکھ کر گرایا ہے اپنے کو اور رونا شروع کر دیتی ہیں۔ عزاداران حسین، زینب بھائی کے لاش پر روتی ہے، لیکن وہاں ایک عجیب و غریب میں نے منظر دیکھا ہے تاریخ میں۔ عام طور سے مرد بڑے ہمت سے کام لیتے ہیں، خواتین زیادہ ایموشنل اور جذباتی ہوتی ہے، لیکن اس گھڑی ہم نے کربلا میں حالات کو بالکل برعکس دیکھا ہے۔ ایک مرتبہ جناب زینب بیان کرتے کرتے جب نظریں اوپر جاتی ہیں، امام زین العابدین کے چہرے پر نظر گئی، کہتی ہیں بیٹا تیری کیا کیفیت ہو رہی ہے، یہ نہ ہو کہ تیری روح جو ہے جسم سے نکل جائے۔ اس وقت امام نے کہا ہے پھوپھی جان میری یہ کیفیت کیوں نہ ہو، ہم جوان بھی ہیں اور زندہ ہیں، لیکن بابا کا لاشا بے گور و کفن کربلا میں چھوڑ کے جا رہے ہیں۔ وہاں پر زینب نے تسلی دی، کہا بیٹا اتنا غم نہ کرو، رسول نے نانا نے یہ کہا تھا ایک وقت آئے گا یہاں مزار بھی بنے گا اور بڑی تعداد میں لوگ تیرے بابا کی زیارت کے لیے آئیں گے۔ الا لعنت اللہ علی القوم الظالمین سیعلم الذین ظلموا ای منقلب